Okay, we are on chapter 3, Kilayim Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph. Kilayim Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph. This Mishnah is somewhat complicated and confusing. What the Mishnah is going to try to do is demonstrate if I have a tiny plot of land, what is the maximum amount of different plants that I can plant within a tiny plot of land? And we're going to see that this is somewhat complicated and involves a little bit of geometry and certain shapes. So please bear with me. I'll try to explain it as clearly as possible. Understand also there's a zillion possible permutations. We're not going to go through them all. What we're going to do is explain them according to the Kahati with an introduction from the Bar Tanura. Okay, says the Bar Tanura. But Pirush Rabbi Akiva in Shabbat, Darash la Mikra Dichti. The Chazal learn out from the following pasuk. Kika aretz totit tzmecha ukegina zro'ea tatzmiach. I think that's how you pronounce the pasuk. Okay. Totzicha. The Gemara says totzi means one. Tzamcha chad. Hare trey. That's two. Zro'eha trey. Hare arba. That's four. Tatzmiach chad. The word tatzmiach is one. Hare chamisha. So we learn from there that in a small plot of land, you're able to somehow fit in 5 different species. Okay, so he says, so we're going to learn out that in a tiny plot of land, that the sum total is 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim. Somehow you can fit in 5 different plants. He says, 1 second, we learned above, in the second chapter, yerek beyerek shisha tvachim. Between different types of plants, you have to separate 6 tvachim. So how in the world can you fit 5 different plants in the space of 6 by 6 tvachim? Hani mili b'sedeh gedola. That's only in a big field. Sheesh ba'yerek harbe, where there's a lot of vegetables. Aval hacha de'ein zorea mikol echad me'al me'at lo chayshina. But in a tiny plot of 6 by 6 tfachim, where you're only planting a little bit, we're not choshesh. That's not our problem. Okay? So we're going to have cases, just so you understand, 6 by 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim, where we're going to fit in 5 different types of plants, and you'll understand why in a second. Another introduction. Umash yesh laktin the pirush mishnah. And what we have to understand is, so the minimum, absolute minimum that of separation, distinction between different plants is 1.5 tefachim. 2 tefachim, 1.5 tefachim, 13, however many centimeters it is. Okay? And he mentions it's not like Rashi. Rashi says you need double that. We're not going like Rashi. You need 1.5 tefachim between different plants. Why? So that they don't draw water one from the other. Ela im tiyeh zavit bitzad zavit or bitzad sela makom zuriya shniya az lo yitztarech. But remember, we learned before that there was something called a sela. I think it was that if you had a shape, 2 different shapes. If you had a triangle that was going into a square, then those were not considered. Here we are, okay? Because it looks like the end of the field. The Mishnah called it Rosh Tor. The Rosh Tor was way back in Perek Bet, in the middle of chapter 2. Rosh Tor was chapter 2, Mishnah Zion, Rosh Tor. Okay? So in this case, let's go back to our shapes. If I have one thing, two, even now imagine these are tiny plots of land, a triangle going into, we're talking about 2 different vegetables here, so let's get rid of the labels. Not chitim and sorim, but one kind of vegetable and another. Or one kind of vegetable growing in this, I planted in this shape and another one in that one, it's not a problem. Okay? That's the second rule. The third rule, in order to understand the area of how much you're planting, is to understand that if I have, for example, if I have a 4 by 4 square, this is a rule in geometry, this is what they tell me, I don't remember my math, and I have a diagonal, I have a diamond inside that square, geometry tells me that this diamond is half of the area of the entire square. So therefore, and this works even in rectangles also, as we'll soon see. So if I have 4 by 4, that's 16 square tefachim, then this is 8 by 8. This is 8. You can just figure it out. It's 8 square tefachim. Okay? That being said, now we can understand our Mishnah. How do you get 5 different zeronim on a 6 by 6? Says the Mishnah, Aruga shehi shishat tefachim al shishat tefachim. If you have an aruga, a square plot that's 6 tefachim by 6 tefachim, really like tiny, 6 by 6, okay? Zor'im betocha chamisha zeronim. Chazal learned that from the pasuk that we learned before, that you can actually plant inside of it 5 different types of plants. Arba be'arba ruchota aruga, ve'echad be'emsa. 4 in the 4 directions of the aruga, and 1 in the middle. So just according to the Kati, he's going to explain exactly how many. 4 in the 4 directions. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1 in the middle, he says on a diagonal. Because remember, since the diagonal they can touch, since we said this is okay, since the Rosh Torah is not a problem, so therefore this is not a problem. And these touching are also not a problem because they only touch on diagonals. It's like you're playing a game of blocus in some way. Okay? So therefore, how much do you have? Remember we said this is an area of 8, plus another 1, 2, 3, plus another 16. You can fit up to 24 out of 36 total tfachim. You could plant in 24 out of the 36 total tfachim. Okay? The Kahati gives another explanation based on the Gemara. It's this. Remember, if you plant 1.5 by 1.5 4 times, okay, that's altogether 9. And then a diagonal, that's half of 16 by 16, which is 18, 36, which is 18. So that would mean I'm planting 27 tfachim out of a total of 36, which is pretty good odds. Okay, that's how we learned that you could get 5 minim in, and they're allowed to touch on diagonal. Remember, you could get in 5 minim, and that's what the Mishnah says. 2 different explanations. You can get in 5 different minim with 1 aruga be'emza, and you see how both of them interpret it in different ways. Okay, arba ba'arba ruchot aruga ve'echad be'emza, and that's how you get 5 zeronim in shishat tfachim on shishat tfachim. Next case. Hayala gvul gova tefach. If you added around this 6 by 6, you added a tefach around the entire frame. Let's look at the picture. So I added a tefach around the entire frame. I'm not going to go into it, but the Kahati, for whatever reason, for reasons that are in the Yerushalmi, adds a small border. But let's say, so now you added a frame. So if I had 6 by 6, it's going to be 8 by 8. So then says the Mishnah, Zorin betocha shlosha asar. I can now plant 13 different types of species in my 8 by 8. Shlosha al kol gvul ugvul ve'echad be'emza. Okay, let's look at this. So now I have 13. Sorry, this one didn't come out more in black and white. So I have 1, 2, 3. Remember, I'm planting with a differentiation of 1.5. Each one is 1.5. Remember, this is 6 by 6. So if I have 1.5 by 1.5, so there I have 3, 3, 3, 3. That's 12. Plus another diagonal, and that's 13. That's one way for me to plant up to 13 different types of plants in an 8 by 8 area. The Mishnah continues. Lo yita rosh halefet betoch hagvul. Lo yita rosh halefet. You can't plant turnips betoch hagvul in the border. Let's just go back to our picture. Okay, if I would plant turnips here, apparently turnip plants, they spray too much and they would fill in the spaces of 1.5 tfachim in between. Finally, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shisha be'emza. Rabbi Yehuda says, now I can get 13, I can get 18 different species. Why? I can put 6 in the middle. Instead of doing one big one and wasting all this space, I can get 6 in the middle here, okay, and let's count 12, because the 3 on each of the 4 sides, and then 6 in the middle. Remember, because I can fill in that space. That's altogether in the size of 8 by 8, which is 64 square tfachim. I can fill in 18 different species and fill it in with 12 tfachim, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 12. Plus, each one of these is half of 2 by 3, 6, which is 3. So that's 3 times 6. 3 tfachim times 6 is 18. Altogether, I can fill in up to 30 tfachim in that area, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, what's interesting to me is, in some ways, this seems like like mind games or exercises. But in another way, Chazal understood that land was very, very hard to come by. People had tiny, tiny plots, and everybody was trying to plant as much as they possibly could in order to provide for themselves. So while there were dinim of Kilayim to worry about, you sort of get the strong sense that Chazal were trying to find ways in order to allow people to plant as much as humanly possible, even in the tiniest of areas. Living in the city, you have a backyard, and everybody splits it up, and everybody shares a courtyard, everybody wants to plant a tiny amount. Nonetheless, Chazal were trying to find creative ways in order to allow people to plant the maximum area possible. We're going to stop here. If you have any comments or questions, a little bit of a tricky Mishnah. Hopefully we're able to explain it somewhat clearly. If you have any questions, obviously, rspolter@gmail.com. And we'll dedicate learning to the memory of my father, Harav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.